to start on this second part of the three-part series of this watercolour foundation. Although I've gone in more depth in the past, I'm going into a fair amount of depth in this one. What I've done is in the first part we've made it just for beginners, just the very basics. Now we're going on to the beginners and intermediate part, where I'm going to first of all show you examples of my work of all different types of the techniques and styles. So we're going to run through wet into wet, we're going to run through masking fluid and so on, just to give you a basic idea of how these different methods and techniques are used and where they're used. And then after that I'm going to go on to painting little demonstration pieces from these photographs I've just been showing you at the beginning of this film, because I think that these particular photographs display best or will help to show best those techniques. I should then run through each different painting and describe the techniques and the brushes and show and demonstrate every way of using those. Just basically, again, just as a foundation for you to then go and experiment with, so you know what materials and tools and how to go about at least exploring and trying yourself. Remember, you don't have to see the whole film through in one go. You can always come back and see it through in pieces, especially if you actually buy the DVD of it or anything like that. It's much easier than on screen, isn't it? But you can still go on even on YouTube and go back to sections here. So although people say, well, it seems a long film, you don't have to stay on it. You can watch it, stop it, go away, do a bit, come back, replay it later. You don't have to see the whole thing in one go. It's nice to do that and then come back, but that's up to you. So anyway, here we go then. First of all, we're looking at 4 little watercolours I did over in Switzerland many years ago. Just sitting after breakfast, looking out over this beautiful panorama of the mountains there near Bern, and doing these little watercolour studies as the light rose every morning. So there's 4 little studies done. Quite a lot of the work you're going to see is done on plein air, though a lot of it is also studio. I will explain as I go along which is plein air and which isn't. And plein air means out in the air, out in fresh air. I really enjoy painting in plein air or in the natural situation. You've got more light, you've got more atmosphere, you've got more colour, there's more challenge, there's more vibrance. It's just more fun for me. But obviously there are certain situations where you can't do that. We're going to run through all the methods and techniques now, and not only watercolour but some mixed medium as well. We'll deal with pen and watercolour, we'll deal with masking fluids, we'll deal with salt, we'll deal with all sorts of different things. But by the end of this video we'll have all of the basics, and then we're going to move on in the third part to actually doing one last major piece, a street scene, and that's where we're going to be doing figures and things as well.
In the previous and first film, we discussed the materials and the watercolour and the methods we were going to use, the basics. So let's remember then the paper and how we told you how to stretch the paper. In this case I've soaked the paper and put gum tape on, and then the colour palettes that I suggested to you, and then of course we need all of our brushes and other materials, sponges and so on, and of course a soft pencil and a rubber. A reminder that we're working with watercolour from light to dark. We're using our light paper and the paint as thinly as we need across it to make lighter colours. Often we're going to work wet into wet, or we're going to work in sections as I am here, gradually painting each section in at a time, light, and working glaze over glaze. That is, we've got the washes and then we work glaze over glaze, texture over texture, a combination of as many different techniques and methods as the painting requires. It might only take 1 or 2, it might take the whole plethora. So as I've just said, to have lighter colours you have to make the paint thinner and let the white paper do the work. In other words, yellow and white makes cream, so we would make the yellow thinner to make the cream. The only other way to have lights is to either leave the white paper or to actually put on some fluid, some masking fluid, that when it's dry can be rubbed off later to leave the paper underneath, or finally to rub paint away, or to actually add some white gouache or white opaque paint over the top. Of course the opaque paint can be applied with a brush, but the masking fluid is a bit more of a problem. You can buy special masking fluid brushes, which I advise, as the masking fluid can tend to clog up ordinary brushes. Equally, a rubber tip clay shaper is very good for masking fluid, as is the special nozzles that come with some of the masking fluids with a fine needle at the end, so you can do very fine lines like the ones in the yachts here. The masking fluid is applied before the painting is started and must be absolutely dry before you put any watercolour on. Also, the watercolour must be totally dry before you remove the masking fluid. Soft pastels may also be combined and used with watercolours, in this case with these boats in Portugal, in this case over watercolour as a snow scene. You can blend the pastel with water as well and combine it with actually the watercolour itself. Another wonderfully bright and vibrant medium to combine and use with watercolour is acrylic inks. They can be used in exactly the same way, but you must remember that once they're dry, they stay dry and they can't be moved or lifted as watercolour can. Of course, you can use pastels, as I was just saying, with them, pastels with the acrylic inks as well as with the watercolours, and Chinagraph pencil, which is semi-waterproof, can be used underneath, as in this snow scene. The Chinagraph pencil won't move or blur with the water, but you do have to be careful because it is waterproof and it can't be rubbed off, so your drawing has to be good. We need to use watercolour mediums for their most inherent beauty. Wet into wet is beautiful for this, to get the effects of light and looseness, as you just saw with that acrylic ink one, and now we're moving on to watercolours that have all been done with this wet into wet loose technique. You can work more tightly into the wet into wet. As you see here, if I start loose I can finish more tightly, but working loosely gives you a lovely vibrance and it gets that luminosity that only watercolour can have. With most paintings, as a rule of thumb, we normally work from our largest brushes towards our smaller brushes. No difference here with wet into wet, and I would certainly advise that when working very loosely like this, you work with your largest brushes most of all. My oval mop is ideal for this because with the oval mop I can use it in a broad way one way and then a fine way another, and then work my way down to the narrower brushes. Ron Ransom was a wonderful artist doing this. He would work with a hake brush and then finish off with a rigger brush and do his entire paintings just with the two brushes. But of course you can use various brushes with it as you work the washes up and then onto glazes and do it nice and loosely. You can go tighter and tighter and tighter, working into your round brushes, into your fan brushes, and even through into your rake brushes. You can get some beautiful effects, as you can see here. But we don't have to use a whole plethora of colours. We can use a limited palette, in this case just a few that I've mentioned earlier, and it's very interesting how we can use just those few very effectively together. In fact, some ways it does help because it gives you a certain coherence to the painting. Remember that normally no white paint is used in watercolour at all, especially in mixing, only perhaps if you're using opaque paint over the top afterwards. All of these lights are achieved by the luminosity of the white paper showing through the transparent paint. But there are many other ways we can get texture into watercolour. In this case I put sea salt on and even splattered with a toothbrush, light over dark and dark over light, to get the snow effects. The sea salt must be left to dry after it's been placed onto the painting and then rubbed off once it's dry. Here you can see lifting out, and here you can see the texturing done with a hake brush, and obviously various textures done here with round brushes, with flat brushes, and even with the fans and the rake brushes. There's also dry brush work done, which means we're dragging a semi-dry brush across the surface of the paper. The rougher the paper for this, the better. So it's a matter of using all of these techniques together very often, playing one off against another. Smooth looks smoother if you have something rough next to it. Next we move on to blending, which is where we've used those various techniques, but we've also started to blend some edges together to make them softer. So some edges are harder, some edges are softer, some edges are wet to wet, and some are harsh. There is no one right way to use any paint. There is no one single method that is the correct method. There are certain things that won't work. So when I now move on to flower painting, I don't tend to paint representationally, I don't tend to paint photographically. I want to use the paint about its transparency and about its fluidity and about the luminosity of it. But that doesn't mean to say that I feel it's wrong for you to. If you wish to paint photographically, please do so. You can do this as watercolour. If you wish to paint even more loosely than I am, please do so. Surely that's the beauty of art, that it's all very individual, that if I set the same subject for a class, the entire class's work will all be different, each and every piece. As I showed in the first film, here I've been lifting out these light areas on the water to give this sheen of light reflecting across as the wind and the breeze just ripples it gently. Then I've used the play of wet into wet in the background to make it out of focus and give distance, cooler colours in the background, warmer colours in the foreground, and also use the texture of brushes and small dots and dashes of twigs and branches to give the texture and make the smooth seem even smoother and shinier. In this particular film I shall not be covering watercolour pencil, and I shall not be using pen and ink and watercolour either. I've left those to other films, but I'll just show you these couple of examples. It shows you the versatility of the medium and how many ways you can work and how many ways you can enjoy. Right then, now it's time for me to start demonstrating all of these different ways for you.
Well, we're going to have a go at this painting now. There's lovely blue sky, fluffy clouds, but it's slightly dark underneath. So it's those lovely days where you get patches of sunlight reflecting across the land all around here. So I want to start with actually using a little bit this time. There's so many ways we can paint this. I'm going to use a little bit of raw sienna first. So a very light wash of raw sienna just into these clouds. Because I want some areas to be very light and some to be just that fraction darker. That's where I want things to just flood together underneath here and through into here. So I'm just taking a little bit of raw sienna. Yellow ochre would do, but raw sienna is slightly more transparent underneath some of these areas here. Remember that colours will dry slightly lighter than we put them on, so I'm using my oval mop, my favourite brushes. Right, so I've got that lot. I should go do a little lifting out as well as leaving the lights behind. Right, next I'm going to take some of this rather beautiful cobalt violet that I mentioned earlier. It's not a colour you can mix, so it's a colour you have to go buy. And I want to add some of that into this already while it's damp. And some of this cobalt violet is going to come into where these blues are as well. So I'm going to bring it right through here. A little bit stronger than you might expect in places because I know that it's going to go lighter later. Coming right down through into here, into these clouds. So showing you different ways of painting skies, different ways of doing the clouds up into here. Haven't damped these down yet. Cerulean blue, a little touch of turquoise and just drop into here between these clouds. So a bit more cerulean. Letting it now flood a little bit into the cloud. Going down through into here, through between these clouds, nice and light. I'm going to work this wet into wet and a little bit stronger in places. Up through into there. Don't want to go too strong there. A bit of blue coming through in the cloud here. I'm going to go a bit darker later. Just dabbing it on now where I want it to go. The paint will level itself off as it comes downwards. I want to go stronger still, so I'm now going to go to my ultramarine, my stronger blues. Start dropping the ultramarine in, right up through here. Stronger still. Really lovely and strong and blue up here. Lifting out with the tissue. Lovely effect. Now while it's still damp, to come back and make a grey, take my ultramarine blue again, it's a lovely blue, and a little bit of burnt sienna, much more ultramarine in that bit, with that deep blue, coming very dark just under that cloud just there, up and through here. Again, come back with the tissue. We need to lift out anywhere, and we'll lift some of these lighter areas out on the edge. You start to get the idea. Now I'm going to go a bit stronger again with that blue again. While it's still wet, I just want to be a little bit stronger in places and drop in a bit more blue here and there. The touch of the violet into it. This much darker storm cloud here, take the same blue and I'm going to add a little bit of Prussian to it now to go just a little bit darker under here. There we go. That gives us that lovely effect of the clouds. I'll leave that because I can come back into there in a moment if I want. Right, what I've shown you so far is just putting wet into wet and a bit of lifting off. Now it's dry enough, you should be able to go back in with a little cobalt and do a bit of blending as well. So I'm going to go a bit stronger around these outer edges of these clouds here. Deliberately doing some slightly harder edges here, right up and through here. That gives us that sky. I'll make some quite strong, warmer green now. I'll take some Prussian, a little bit of my raw sienna, and I can make quite a strong
warmer green with that. It's a bit blue at the moment. Going darker across here. And we can start doing a bit of texturing of the trees in the distance. Little lines of trees coming along, wet into wet. Right, this is dry enough here now to go in with a slightly darker. Again, quite differently, same picture though, and I'm going to treat it much more loosely. I was just really overworking that last one. Let's drop in some clean water right down, not even going to bother drawing it in. Just go straight on. So I've already done the drawing once, I know where it's going. I'm going to drop clean water all the way in and drop wet into wet completely on this one. On a slight angle the same. So I'm going to use this bit of aureolin yellow this time into the cloud here before I put in the warmer yellow. So very loosely there. Then I want that same cobalt violet again that I loved, working up through these. So I'm painting wet directly into wet this time, and I want to keep the whole paper going wet. Right, now I want to bring in some of that raw sienna, ultramarine, and a wee touch of the cobalt violet. We'll just find some of these deeper colours here that we were looking for earlier. There we go. The warm greys. Look at the lovely effect of watercolour we get this way, which I think personally is much fresher and much nicer. But underneath the clouds there, and it's so much quicker as well. I must admit though that to be fair, it does take all of us time to get back into the flow of watercolour, to get loose with it. Right, again, come back. We've got these lovely effects. Now let's lift out little bits of cloud here and there. There we go, that's our sky done. Now again, down here, simple wash straight away. I'm going to take some cobalt blue, a little bit of sap green, come all the way along down here just to get the tones done. Right, on we go then, and this is now dry with the hairdryer. Just bring my photograph back, of course we're starting the other one tomorrow, and I just want to work up just a few of these greys. So carefully now, a little bit of that brown and the blue, just to look at some of these greys coming underneath the clouds here. Just here and there, maybe here. So using the edge of the brush to lift a little bit of the light cloud out here now. And we'll look at this horizon line. It's nice and fresh there, but a little bit overworked there. Now the horizon line, going down through here. Now then again, back to my dry brush work. A little bit now of the greens being dragged across here. Just let some of those flood into it, just a fraction, just touching here and there, so that they flood down, give the feeling of distance. And there's our landscape, and as quickly, as simply as that, we can drop in a few little bits and bobs here to give an effect of foreground. So I know which I prefer the looser ones like this, but that's your choice, isn't it? So we'll compare those together in photograph,
And that's two ways of doing skies, one very laboured, one very worked up, perhaps overworked, another very loose. But this way you can gradually tighten up, so I always prefer to start loose and finish tighter. Right, tomorrow we're going to start on distant hills.